Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the new film Predator Badlands, which just came out today. It's the latest edition in the Predator franchise. And as the film starts, a runt yautja, aka Predator, named Dek, spars with his Predator brother Quay, who had been ordered by their father Nior to kill Dek since he isn't as strong or as accomplished a hunter as his fellow yautja, and thereby a disgrace to the clan. After they spar and Quay refrains from killing Dek, Dek takes a vow to hunt the Kalisk, a reputedly unkillable apex predator, on the lethal planet Genna in order to earn the approval of Najor. Before he can leave, Najor shows up to their location and again orders Quay to kill Dek. But Quay defies the order and remotely activates his transport ship to take Dek to Genna, as Dek is forced to watch helplessly as Najor executes Quay after Quay challenged him. Upon crash landing on Genna, Dek faces numerous environmental dangers from both flora and fauna. He reluctantly allies with Thea, a damaged Wayland Corporation synthetic whose team was destroyed while attempting to also capture the Kalisk. Thea offers to help Dek track the Kalisk in exchange for returning her to the place where her legs were cut off by the Kalisk so that she can reconnect them. Later, they're joined by a native creature which Thea names Bud, and which marks Dek with its spit on one occasion of the ragtag unlikely team-up camping down for the night between attempts to hunt down the Kalisk, both scenarios which, over time, cause them to unwittingly bond with and passively befriend each other. Meanwhile, Thea's synthetic sister Tessa is reactivated after herself having been damaged and begins tracking Dek and the group. After discovering the remains of her team previously killed by the Kalisk and her long-lost legs, Thea contacts Wayland Yutani, essentially betraying Dek because she doesn't think that he can kill the Kalisk and that his further attempts to do so will only end in his own death. She then attempts to repair herself, but isn't immediately successful as the Kalisk shows up and confronts Dek. And though he manages to sever its head and cut it in half, the creature regenerates after both attacks and defeats him. The Wayland Yutani team then arrive and capture Dek and the Kalisk, holding them for study. Tessa begins experimenting on Dek, but Thea intervenes. In fact, she helps Dek escape after herself being slated for deactivation by Tessa. As Dek continues to hunt the Kalisk, he realizes that Bud is the Kalisk's child and decides to rescue both Thea and the captured Kalisk from the Wayland Yutani group. Lacking his yautja weapons, Dek uses the resources of Genna to create organic weapons before he and Bud attack the Wayland Yutani base, destroying many synthetics with the help of Thea, who has now managed to take control of her legs, which aid in the fight autonomously, before she manages to finally reattach her legs to her torso. Dek then helps the Kalisk escape, and it destroys much of the facility. Tessa, now in a mech suit and armed with Dek's laser weapon, kills the Kalisk, but is ultimately destroyed by Dek and Bud when she attempts to kill Thea. Dek then returns to Yautja Prime with Bud, Thea, and Tessa's skull as a trophy. He then demands a cloaking device as a reward from his father, which, of course, would be commensurate with him being ushered in as a true hunter among his clan. But when Najor denies him this, Dek avenges Quay by disarming Najor and setting him up to have his head bitten off by Bud, who has now grown significantly since we last saw him on Genna. Dek then prepares for a confrontation with his mother, who arrives in a large ship, and that's where the movie ends. So I've reviewed a couple of different Predator films before, namely Prey and Killer of Killers. And in that review, I mentioned how I've never been a huge fan of the Predator series, to the extent that I live and breathe Predator lore and so forth. But I have seen, as far as I know, all of the Predator films, and I remember liking them all. And that comes into play here because I also liked this movie. The thing is, it's a huge departure from the traditional Predator movie, and not everybody, from what I'm reading and seeing on the internet, has been able to like it because they are, I suppose you could say, more married to the Predator lore and the Predator sort of story as we've known it to this point. And I think that's unfortunate. because I think this is a good, enjoyable film, despite the fact that, yes, it very much does depart from the conventions of the Predator sphere as far as what they've been up to. Now, I can understand that because I found the departures to be a bit of a double-edged sword myself. Again, I ultimately liked the movie and I liked, how they depicted Predator society in this film. But at the same time, I also kind of felt a little twinge of, gee, this kind of wrecks the Predator mythos to a certain extent. And I only didn't find that sort of a deal breaker for the movie because I think the trade-off is that you get benefits, story-based benefits, narrative-based benefits from the departure or departures that I think compensate for that. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So, from the beginning, the Predator has been a creature of great mystery, like where are they from? What the hell is this thing? How did it get to be this way? You knew very, very little about it, and that made it more scary and more sort of awe-inspiring and, iconic. But, with any kind of iconic character from a franchise or even just one really popular story, you're going to get folks who want more and who will, sort of clamor for more from the producers or the owners of the IP. And so what ends up happening is that the powers that be will, over time, add to the backstory or add to the lore of the character or sometimes a universe to sort of cater to those fans and deepen their connection to the IP and thereby increase its popularity and increase its lucrativeness. Because, then you can have novels, right? And comic books and merch and games and stuff because the lore at that point is so built up that there's room to go in various directions where there wouldn't have been if you had kept the sort of mythos narrow. So that's tended to happen over the years. One example, I think, is when they crossed it over with the Alien universe, which is why the Wayland Corporation is mentioned in this film because of a previous crossover with that universe, because Alien is another character where they've sort of built up the lore over the years. Of course, it's a little different with Alien because they haven't gone in the same direction that they've gone with Predator. Like the Alien character, the Xenomorph, for example, is still very mysterious. We still know very little about it. We still know nothing about whether or not it has, whether that species has a society, as it were. We still don't know any of that stuff, even though they've made countless movies and stuff about it. And so I think it's kind of unfortunate that they didn't stay within that sort of set of confines for the Predator universe in their attempt to deepen the lore and heighten the profitability of the IP by using that sort of world building or lore building or mythos building to deepen the connection of the audience to it. And I say that because what happens in this movie is they totally took the character and woobified it. By making it a sympathetic character. Some people have said protagonist. I don't necessarily want to go that far, but they've certainly made it a sympathetic character, where you see it not as a vicious killing machine that has very little redeeming value as an entity, and now see it as a multifaceted, multi-layered, sentient being with, a conscience and feelings and straight up character that the species wasn't shown to have before. They were very much one-dimensional, and it worked because that's all you ever needed them to be. And I understand where people are coming from when they say they think that takes away from the IP on the whole. I get it, because I feel it too. The thing is that I don't find it to be a deal breaker because even though I've never been a huge Predator head, I actually like the fact that they've taken it in this direction. Kind of. I'm on the fence. It's really crazy. But I do like aspects of it. I like the fact that, we get to see, not only in this film, but in Killer of Killers, the fact that there is a quote-unquote society that the yautja have formed, and that they have mores and customs and practices and ways of seeing things and ways of doing things. Kind of like Klingons in the Star Trek universe, right? The Klingons were very one-dimensional, very much mustache-twirling villains in the original series, and it stayed that way up through Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and then became something else, starting with Star Trek: The Next Generation and even more so on Deep Space Nine, two shows on which the Klingon species was ever present and shown throughout the years to be a multi-layered, multifaceted, and quite frankly, fascinating race of people that had a society like any other society, that had a class system, as it were, not necessarily a terribly pronounced one like you'd find in real life in, say, India, which is they call it a caste system. But certainly you had your warriors, you had your elite warriors, you had people who didn't go into battle but who served the empire in other ways by being artisans or service providers and so forth. And it's probably one of the greatest things that happened to Star Trek over its, 60-year existence. It's something that really, really worked for the Klingons and which enriched Star Trek greatly. And I think they managed to do all that without detracting from the fearsomeness of the Klingons and from the iconicness of the Klingons, who most fans, I think, still see as this strong, domineering warrior race, which also has a lot of substance to it, which isn't just that one thing, which isn't just one-dimensional. So that's why, for me, what they've done with the Predator species in this movie isn't a deal breaker, because I think they have the potential to take it in a similar direction. And I first sort of noticed this when I was watching Killer of Killers, and I mentioned it in my review that it was kind of cool that they showed us, a look at Predator society. So it worked for me. The thing is, I think it's possible they went a little too far, a little too soon with it, because they really changed this one Predator kind of overnight. And it isn't that it isn't believable, because it is, because he's been mistreated by his clan and sort of downcast. And so he's in a sort of psycho-emotional state where, it was easy for him to, I think, find himself bonding with other people, other beings. And it certainly made it easier for him, I think, to reject the rigidity of yautja sort of society, which hadn't treated him well and which would have left him for dead, which would have made him dead. So it's totally believable. It's just that I think now they have to follow it up with more depictions of these multi-layered, multi-dimensional yautja in the future that aren't quite so, I want to say, after-school special-ish. So Hallmark movie character-ish. And that, are a little bit more aggro and a little bit less intellectually available, emotionally available, to balance it out so that we can see that the Predators still retain their fearsomeness and their warriorness and sort of still have gravitas. I think it's going to be very important for them to make sure that that is still there the next time they do a Predator film, which it very much looks like they're going to by the end of this one, and I can't see why they wouldn't. These movies always do well. So that's kind of my overall thinking about the differentness of this film versus the previous ones. But I did like this movie quite a bit. If you look at it as a standalone film and say, was it a good movie? Was it an enjoyable movie? If you take out any considerations one way or the other about the Predator angle itself, yes, it's very good. The action sequences are crazy. The scenes between the three characters and the way they play off each other and interact with each other are very cool. Elle Fanning is excellent in this movie. The characterization of Thea is excellent. I enjoyed it a lot. I always like a good story where characters are thrown together and figure out kind of what they have in common or how they have common goals without giving voice to it necessarily, and sort of just gel and become aligned with each other and, look out for each other and become friends, as it were, which very much happens in this movie, and which is why I did, in fact, like it. I don't know that I liked this movie as much as Prey, or that I liked it in the same way that I liked Prey, because they're different movies, but I did like that movie, and I liked this one. I know for sure that I didn't like either of those movies as much as I liked Killer of Killers, which I thought was fantastic, because it spends most of the movie doing action stuff where the Predators are just badasses the whole time. And you don't see any of that Predator Society stuff until right at the end, and there's so little of it that it doesn't really affect the overall narrative. So just a great movie. The animation's amazing. If you haven't seen that, you should see it. It's on Hulu, I think. But I did like it. And if you like a good action movie with solid performances that are a lot of fun. I mean, it's like a buddy movie almost in a way. And I always like those. There's, comic relief and, like I said, great action on top of it. So it's and the narrative is good ultimately. So I really liked it. I just don't know that I could sit down and go, wow, this was a kick-ass Predator movie. I couldn't really say that. So if that's what you need it to be, you might be disappointed. But if you're out for a good, action romp that has comic relief and a story that, is a little Hallmark-esque, then you'll have a good time. So, you would be someone that should check it out. So I hope it does well, and I hope they make another one that's a direct sequel. I still want them to make a direct sequel to Killer of Killers. I think that would be awesome. And I wouldn't hate a direct sequel to Prey, by the way, just while we're at it. But that's really all there is to say, and I think I've said quite a bit, so I'm going to get out of here. I will be back, of course, with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.